One of the most common and difficult questions facing pro-lifers today is this: what about allowing abortion in cases of rape? For this week's Pro-Life Focus, our next guest will speak for herself in answering that question.
My name is Jennifer Christie.
Up until 4.5 years ago, sign language interpreter Jennifer Christie was a wife and mother of 4. But Christie's life underwent a radical change one January winter.
I'm here tonight to represent the 32,000 women a year who become pregnant after rape, and the 75% of us who give our children life.
As she testifies and shares publicly today, Jennifer Christie is a survivor of and mother from rape. As hard as it is to talk about, can you share with us what happened? Take us back to January of 2014.
Okay, so I've shared this a lot, and it has not gotten easier. Okay.
Jennifer tells us she was staying at a hotel alone while traveling for work. On the last day of her 2-week trip, her job let out early because of snowfall. She went back to her hotel.
I walked up to my room and didn't know that I was being followed. I couldn't hear anything. It was very windy, and I had my scarf up and all that. And I got my door open, and I dropped everything on the floor and turned around to close my door, and there was a man in my doorway. I thought, with the weather, I thought maybe his car broke down, or maybe he needed to use my phone or something, and all this kind of went through my mind in like a second. And then he kind of gave me a strange smile and punched me in the head.
Jennifer tried to fight as the man proceeded to assault and rape her. She eventually passed out. Jennifer then awoke to a woman's scream when she discovered she was wearing only a scrap of clothing and laying outside in a stairwell near the dumpster.
But I remember trying to move and realizing that I was very hurt. And I tried to pick myself up, and I looked at my hands, and there was blood on them, and my nails were all cracked and broken, and I just remembered fighting.
Jennifer was taken to the hospital and treated for fractured ribs, broken fingers, a brain bleed, and severe internal damage. She's since undergone multiple surgeries. As a few weeks passed and her body began to heal, Jennifer and her husband decided she'd move forward with work to keep herself preoccupied. She left for a business trip on a cruise when she got very sick.
One of the head doctors came in to me, and she said, we're going to need to give you an IV. Is there any chance you could be pregnant?
Christie immediately thought no. Her husband had a vasectomy.
And then I stopped, and I thought, and for the first time out loud, I said, I was raped, and it's just an ugly, ugly word. And I just had this feeling in my stomach, and I said, you might want to test me.
The pregnancy test was positive, so the cruise ship made an emergency stop in Colombia for an ultrasound.
On that screen, I saw this tiny little pea, and this was the darkest time in my life, and I, for the first time since the assault, looking at that little dot on the screen, I just felt something come alive in me again. And I felt hope and joy and light. And I remember thinking, okay, I couldn't protect myself. I fought and I tried, but there was nothing I could do, but I could protect that baby. And it was my baby.
And when you told your husband, how did he respond to the news?
I called him and I said, are you sitting down? And he said, what's wrong? I said, I'm pregnant. And there was just a second of silence, and he said, okay. I said, okay, what? Okay, like what is, I need more from you, okay, expand. And he said, sweetheart, he said, this is a gift. He said, this is something beautiful. It's from something so painful and terrible for us. He said, we love babies. And I said, yeah, we love babies. And he said, we can do this.
With a supportive husband by her side, Jennifer welcomed a son into the world. Now, her very youngest, as she calls him, is an integral part of the family.
He is just this bright spot. He's just joy and laughter and silliness. As he's 3 now, so which they happen to be. But even when he was a baby, he was just nothing but big dimpled smiles and all kinds of joy. And the kids just adore him.
I asked Jennifer, a devout Christian, how her faith in God has held up throughout the journey these past 4 years.
When I tell my story, people who are not believers will say, well, where was your God when that happened? And where was your God then? And I think my God was all over that. My God was all over my story. My God was in the fact that I was being dragged away from the scene and would probably be killed. And, someone stepped in and interrupted me being dragged away, and my life was spared. My God was in the fact that I was left in the snow, which controlled the swelling in my brain, and I'm still here. My God was in the fact that I have this child who people would consider, something horrific, but it's been such a joy and kept me going, gave me a reason to want to press on.
Jennifer, we hear often, even from people who identify as pro-life, this excuse for abortions in the cases of rape. People who make this exception, saying it's not fair for the mother. This child would be a reminder of the trauma of rape. But Jennifer, what's been your experience?
Not that at all. I feel like a broken record saying my son is healing, but I can't imagine getting through the last few years without him, without having his light and his life to look forward to. I've never looked at him and seen anything but him. What we're going to be able to tell our son one day is that none of us would be the people that we are today without you. And that's what God did for us.
Again, I want to thank Jennifer Christie for the great courage she showed in sharing her story with us.
It's no mystery that the life within a chrysalis holds value. If there's no shame in destroying human life before it's born, then there would certainly be no shame in destroying a chrysalis before it gives birth to a beautiful butterfly.
Kristen Hawkins is a conservative pro-life leader who has quite the reputation for her ability to debate cogently and patiently with woke students on college campuses. And here's a sample of how patient critical thinking triumphs over the woke mob.
I just want to read you this poster that I have because I hear a lot of pro-lifers say that life begins at conception. So my poster reads, "Life begins when you understand living women matter more than potential babies."
What is it?
What do you mean?
If it's a potential baby, what is inside of a woman?
It's a fetus.
Is it living?
No.
How can it grow if it's not living?
Actually, that's like saying if an acorn is a tree.
When does the fetus become living?
That's actually a good question, but that line...
Yeah, of course, because you don't know it, because it's living. It's living.
How about you let her speak?
You're fundamentally denying science to validate your opinion.
You actively deny science.
All right, so as you can see, this is already a rather hostile exchange, at least from the side of the woke. So what Kristen Hawkins is doing, the pro-life speaker, is she's in effect trying to demonstrate to the student that the student actually finds herself in a logical trap. In denying that the fetus is living, in other words, a living human being, the student ends up denying the very precondition for its growth and development. If the fetus isn't growing or developing, what's your problem with it? So she fell into a bit of a logical trap, and then Kristen brought up scientific studies, which again, the student didn't seem to really know what to do with. But unfortunately for her, the overwhelming preponderance of scientific evidence is actually on the pro-life side. A recent doctoral dissertation written by University of Chicago student Stephen Jacobs found that among over 5,000 biologists regarding their opinion on when human life begins, 95% of those 5,000 biologists all agreed that life begins at conception. And it was an astonishing study because 63% of those biologists sampled considered themselves non-religious, and a full 89% claimed to be politically liberal. Only 11% identified themselves as conservatives. 92% of scientists sampled were registered Democrats. And yet, despite that overwhelmingly left-wing profile, they were almost unanimous, 95%, in recognizing that human life begins at the very moment of fertilization, at the moment a human zygote is formed in the womb. In other words, biologically, the only difference between a human zygote from the moment of conception and, say, a 95-year-old adult is food, air, water, and time. There is no new specified biological information added to the zygote from the moment of conception. So Kristen Hawkins isn't just drawing out the logical hurdles one encounters when trying to arbitrarily decide when life begins outside of conception. She actually has some pretty impressive scientific evidence backing up her position. And as you can see, woke college students don't really quite know what to do with that.
What science did I deny, Darby?
Okay, so let's look at some posters over here. But you don't have to be here.
I need you to tell me what science. You just made an accusation that I denied science. What science did I deny?
That it's a child inside of you. It is a clump of cells when
I'm a clump of cells. What makes me different?
That you were born. You were born.
So you don't. What you're arguing is that anything that is not born is not valuable of life.
I did not say that.
It's subjective. So when does a child or fetus or clump of cells, whatever you want to call it, when does this clump of cells or fetus become living?
When it can sustain its own life.
But when is that? When is the sustainability? No, when is sustainability?
21. About like 30 weeks to born, like 24, 30.
Because like what? How do you sustain life? Like my newborns aren't sustainable. You can't just have a newborn and they just like live on their own, right?
Right.
They're not sustainable. They need help and assistance to survive. So is a newborn not worthy of life? Is a newborn not worthy of life?
Yeah, well, needless to say, the student didn't have an answer to Kristen's challenge. And again, this is precisely where logic and science walk hand in hand. If life doesn't begin when 95% of biologists say it begins, then, well, good luck trying to find a logically sustainable answer to that question, given that the answer is rooted more in a particular left-wing ideology than it is in any objective reality. You'll notice, too, something here. You could see by the students' frequent mannerisms, looking to her ideological comrades for help, you could see in real time, this phenomenon known as groupthink, which, this is something that Douglas Murray talks about in his book, The Madness of Crowds. Critical thinking is replaced by the arbitrary consensus of an ideological group. This is why such groups are often so rude. They're literally like gangs who aren't in the habit of thinking, but instead of reacting. And such reactions end up being badges of identity that shows one to be a faithful member of that group. So obviously the student had no idea how to even begin to answer this pro-life speaker's questions, and so she changed the subject.
Pathetic.
I do have one thing to say to you. How is it that when my mom was in college 30 years ago, she was protesting the exact same thing that me and these wonderful other women and men on this side have been protesting? How is it? Why? Why are we still protesting? Why are we still having to talk about this issue? It is a basic human right to have an abortion, to have a choice.
The reason we're still having the question is because some people don't want to accept the natural consequences of heterosexual sex and be inconvenienced by another human life and want to selfishly choose to end human life in order to have their whims met. That is why you're still arguing that.
Well, now that was a good answer, but we actually have some fascinating data that suggests another answer. And that is that far-left woke activists like the student and her mother have actually been disappearing off the planet these last 30 years. This was precisely the conclusion of University of London scholar Eric Kaufman. He argued recently that liberal values undermine procreation precisely because liberal values undermine the family. Liberalism redefines having children as a mere lifestyle choice and nothing more. And you cannot redefine children as a mere lifestyle choice and expect your society to continue to repopulate. It's what Kaufman calls the soft underbelly of liberalism. In other words, secular liberalism entails its own demographic contradiction. Liberalism necessitates the freedom not to reproduce. And so, as it turns out, secular liberalism is an inherently feudal belief system that by its nature undermines civilizational continuity. And so we could see this actually in real time. You know, AOC once questioned whether it was still good to have children, given the environmental crisis we're facing. She actually said, quote, "Our planet is going to hit disaster if we don't turn this ship around." And so it's basically like there's a scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. Is it okay to still have children? You see, that's not a civilizationally sustainable worldview. Any worldview that is demographically impoverished like that, for whatever reason, will inevitably be surpassed and indeed replaced by a worldview that is demographically abundant and rich. That, I believe, is at least in part responsible for why this woke college student is fighting such a futile battle, exemplified all the more by the futility of her thought.
Why should we care about what happens to the dinosaurs?
Because life, it's worth protecting.